right, welcome. I'm so excited, special guest. Can you introduce yourself and just tell us where you live, what you are known for, what's your area of expertise?
Sure. So my name is Ellen Busch, and I live in Colorado, and I've lived here for about 4 years now. I'm a diehard skier, and I'm an author, and I wrote Disempowered, but the
Mhm.
DIS is crossed out,
Yes, very
and I'm also a life coach, and then I do have a regular 9 to 5 job as well.
cute. Yeah,
So
sometimes we need those. Yes, 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 yes. They keep the lights on. They're handy, aren't they?
they do, they
And we get
do.
some social time. Sometimes when I work a lot in my office, I'm like, maybe I should get out of the house once in a while. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
See what real people are like again. Make sure I haven't
Mhm.
gone full hermit or full eccentric old witch in the woods. Yeah.
Yeah. M- Working remotely certainly has its perks, but it can be isolating.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. I would like to start actually at childhood, which is sort of where, well, I guess all our stories begin, but
Sure.
specifically the story that you coach and wrote your book around. You were
Yeah.
diagnosed with dyslexia, and I think it's really important to know to talk about this in this light as well, because with the flare up show, we talk a lot about chronic illnesses where people are like just trying to get a diagnosis. They're hoping they'll get a label to be able to say what is causing this pain, what is causing this fatigue, what is causing this
Right.
symptom. And they think that it's going to be a gate opener, that it's going to be, a positive thing to get a label. And it can be for sure, definitely.
Yeah.
But for you, when you received your diagnosis with dyslexia, it was sort of the opposite. I'm sure there was good as well, but can you share how your diagnosis turned into a label that potentially hurt you as much as it may have
Yeah.
helped you?
Yeah. And it's such a great question because it really is a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
Here in the US, dyslexia is legally a handicap. So that means a student who is diagnosed as dyslexic falls under the Americans with Disabilities, and they are protected the same way a person in a wheelchair or is visually impaired or hearing impaired.
Hmm.
Um, and that's important because students do need accommodations.
Yes.
Um, we need more time on tests. There's a whole list of accommodations that we are given, and we are protected by law, and that's important too.
Hmm.
And there's a cost associated when a school must provide accommodations. So that's good, and that's important, and that matters. But the problem is that it is associated with or thought of as an intellectual disability,
Hmm.
and it's not. In my case, I scored 115 on an IQ test in abstract reasoning. Now I'm referring to the WIS test, which is the standard test that is given students to diagnose them.
Hmm.
Um, One of the categories, or a couple of the categories, are abstract reasoning and logic. And in abstract reasoning, I scored in the 99th percentile, and in logic, I scored in the 98th percentile. And
Hmm.
with an IQ of 115, that's not an intellectual disability.
No.
But the perception is that it is. And I was written off by the education system. Now, I grew up in a New York City suburb, so a very affluent community, parents who had resources. And despite growing up in this situation, the school system literally wrote me off. One of the things I write about in my book is that my parents were told at a parent-teacher conference that I was not going to participate in society other than as a wife and a mother, and they should focus on finding a husband who would take care of me.
Oh my word.
Yeah. So that context was with me because of that label all the way through high school. They said I'd never go to college. It was out of the question. And I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree. So clearly they got that wrong. But that label was so destructive, it traumatized me. Fortunately for me, I had parents who just did not accept it. They said, no, we are not going to accept it. And if it hadn't been for them, I don't even want to think about where I would be today. And they supported me all the way through school. They were very involved. They showed up. They fought back. They were my advocate. So, to really answer your question, yes, you need that support and that protection under the law, but the consequences of that label are destructive, simply because of the perception of what it means to be dyslexic. And I got the consequences of that, unfortunately. So
Yes.
does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It is ableism, right? At its finest, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
I really admire your parents for taking a different approach. How did they, was it just love, or like how did they know to advocate, and what are some of the things that they did to make sure that you got what you needed?
Sure. So actually, dyslexia tends to run in families,
Mm,
and my father was dyslexic. So
mm.
he understood what was happening. He told me when he was, about 75, he's passed away several years now. But we were sitting and talking, and he told me that when he was 8 years old, he was brought into a parent-teacher conference and with my grandmother and the teachers, and they sat him down and interrogated him as to why he couldn't read.
Oh,
So he had experienced this. And, at his generation, everybody went into the military. And when he took the military entrance exams here in the US, he actually qualified to go to West Point.
mm.
So he did not go that route, but the point is that he qualified. So
Yeah.
how do you go from an 8-year-old who can't read to at 17 qualifying for West Point? So that's, so obviously it's not an intellectual issue. So, and they understood that. And then they were involved in parent-teacher conferences. My mother befriended the teacher. I did have a few amazing teachers. Most of the problems came from administrators,
Yes.
and they also held me back on learning to read. So I want to back up here just a little bit and share
Yeah,
with you that
please.
I was also diagnosed as ambidextrous.
Oh, interesting. My dad's ambidextrous.
So that came first, and that was what led to further testing and the dyslexia diagnosis. So the thought process at the time was that if you were dyslexic, you didn't have, if you were ambidextrous, you didn't have a dominant eye. And if you don't have a dominant eye, you can't learn to read because you cannot track words across a page. So again, that was the belief system at the time.
Yeah.
And they kept testing me and testing me and testing me, and they wouldn't let me learn to read. So most children start, as soon as they're ready. And the end of second grade was when they started to teach me to learn to read. And I know my mother was hounding them. So they were holding me back from learning to read until the end of second grade. So I was 2 years behind my peers. Yeah. So talk about being set up for failure.
Failure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and my mom and I talked about it. And again, both my parents are passed away, but she was fighting for me. Why are you holding her back? Why are, and I'm sure that they started teaching me how to read because she was on the phone and in the office and probably pounding her fist on the desk again,
Yeah.
just fighting for me. She helped me with my homework every day. And a lot of times my homework would end in tears of frustration.
Yes.
It was really awful. It was frustrating. My dad would always be in the background, And he would say, he was teaching me about micro goals, one question at a time. You can do it, Ellen. And this actually became our mantra. One question at a time, you can do it. Prove them wrong, prove them wrong.
Yes. I love
So
that. I love that. I remember, so, and this isn't like forever ago. This is in our present. Like, this is like what, maybe the 80s?
it was actually the 70s, the mid
70s?
mid
Yeah,
to
but
late
still,
'70s.
yeah, that's part of my
It's
lifetime
recent.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's recent. Yeah.
Yeah. Very recent. So I know even when I grew up, I I remember how poorly kids treated anybody that needed a resource teacher or an
Mm,
assistant,
mhm.
even if it was just for homework. Like going to the guidance counselor was like, you will never be accepted again. Like it was, the
Right.
judgment was so crazy. What was
Mhm.
it like for you? Like, because if you were behind and you weren't doing the same things as your peers, I imagine it was noticeable. How did that treatment affect you as well?
Oh my God, I was the target of bullies.
Yeah.
I was severely bullied for 2 years, first and second grade. I was also separated from my classmates in, like you mentioned, the resource room, um, which is a wrong thing to do because it makes you different. No kid wants to be different than their peers.
Yeah.
And it was horrendous. It was horrendous. And I think we really understood then, just how traumatic bullying is. I feel bad for the kids today because they have to put up with it on social media. I mean, we didn't have that then. So I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that piece of it. Fortunately, all of the parents were friends and all knew each other. It was a very small community.
Good.
So, but it got to the point where the parents had to get involved because the teachers just couldn't stop it. Every time the teacher turned her back, there were insults and things being thrown at me. So yes, that was a very big piece of my trauma and have done quite a bit of work on healing that. But that was awful. So I have these two things to contend with. You've got the struggle with learning to read and the dyslexic label, and then you've got this bullying that's going on, and then you have these teachers and administrators who have written me off. How am I supposed to develop self-worth and self-confidence? It's nearly impossible. So, but fortunately, again, I go back to my family. My dad, who was a military veteran, understood that learning through challenge and learning in the outdoors was really key. And it made a massive difference. He sent me on Outward Bound at 15 as a
Wow.
small, yeah, loved Outward Bound, highly recommend Outward Bound. Um, as a little girl, he was a big recreational fisherman, and he taught me everything about the ocean. He taught me how to read the water, the weather, how to pilot his boat, how to read the buoy markers and the channels. I used to have to stand on an upside down bucket so I could reach the steering wheel and see the
Oh,
back of the boat. He
yes.
taught me how to read nautical charts. He taught me everything he knew. And that helped build self confidence. But I was still contending with trauma and
Of
the
course.
bullying abuse. I mean, it was abuse. Let's call it what it really is. So I had this, I had the tools, but what I didn't understand until many, many decades later was that I was carrying around a lot of trauma and I needed to work and heal that.
Hmm. Your dad is quite brilliant. I actually just put out a little reel the other day that, one of the best things to do when you feel like you don't belong is to be outside in nature, because that is
Mm-hmm.
where we actually belong. We belong to this world, we belong to the planet.
Right.
So that gives that
100%.
root, that foundation of like, no, I'm meant to be here. I'm meant to be
Right.
here, regardless of the noise. It doesn't make it easier, right? It doesn't take away or heal. We have to
Right.
work through that, but it is a little bit of sanctuary, being on the water, in the grass, in the
Mm-hmm.
forest, on a mountain skiing, all those things.
Yes.
Yes, I
Yes.
love that.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. You know, and when you talk about the outward bound experience, that's all outdoors at nature.
Yes.
And the reason why that was so important for me, because I wasn't a dyslexic student, I was just a kid on Outward Bound. And that
Yes.
was the first time in my life I got to get away from that label
I love
with
it.
my peers. And here's the other thing that happened too. I knew my trip was 2 weeks whitewater rafting, hiking, climbing, and rappelling on the Green River in Utah. And
Mm,
guess what? Reading the river is just the same as reading the ocean. So I naturally and fluided, almost, just fluidity, I guess is the right word,
yeah.
just stepped into a leadership role.
Oh, I love it.
So here I am, no label, in a leadership role, and I'm doing it successfully. Talk about a game changer. I think those 2 weeks changed the entire trajectory of my life.
Hmm.
And that is exactly why my father sent me. He knew exactly what he was sending me into and why he was sending me, because he
Yes.
knew that that was going to be the case. He knew I was going to thrive there. And actually, at 15, that was the youngest they would take us.
Hmm.
It may have changed now, but that was it. That was in 1987. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's perfect. Um, so now you become an adult and
Mhm.
you go to university and you do have support and you've had some wins, but obviously the trauma carries with you. So now as an adult, what happens? How does your trauma show up as an adult?
It shows up as low self confidence and low self worth. And, it was interesting when I got to college, I just needed a little bit of support services, but I really moved away from not needing any support services. And then
Mhm.
in grad school, I didn't need any.
No.
So, but yeah, to answer your question, I was still terribly traumatized, and here's what happens. And I think this is really important to talk about, and I don't think it's talked about enough. If you are a low self-esteem, low self-confident person, there are predators out there and they're looking for you. They are looking for you. And I had been stalked by two men. I had been bullied by managers. And it, you're not going to excel in a job, no matter what it is, no matter how good you are at it, if you don't have self confidence and self esteem.
Mhm.
So that label and that perception not only traumatized me and hurt me, it knocked me down the socioeconomic ladder. It compromises job opportunities, promotion opportunities, pay opportunities. And at the same time, now the predators are looking for you. And they found me. A few of them found me. And the man I was married to, I'm now divorced. My ex-husband was a narcissist and he was absolutely looking for me.
Yeah.
And he found me. And when I learned to heal and realized what was happening, I went through some training, military style training, to make sure that that would never happen to me again.
Hmm.
So,
I 100% agree. It's like they can smell it. They can smell
yes.
the fear or the the innocence. It's
Mhm.
unbelievable because we don't approach the world the same way. There is an innocence when you're neurodivergent, and
Yeah.
so you assume everybody's got the same intention as you, but that is not always the case.
Right.
Um, and especially when I don't know if this was the case with your ex-husband, but I know for myself that love bombing period, that beginning, that oh my goodness, here's the man on the white horse.
Right.
Oh my God, finally somebody who loves, because it just feels so intense and they're so focused
Mhm.
on that facade, but it's not real. And then it just becomes crumbs and then it turns into some pretty horrific
Absolutely.
abuse, right? Because
Hmm.
they
It
can't
is.
sustain. Is that sort of how your trajectory went too? Where you're like, oh, finally,
Absolutely.
somebody sees me and
100,
loves me.
100%. We were first date to marriage, 13 months.
Yeah.
Very typical. Yeah, and it's exactly what you described, the love bombing. And then it's like somebody flipped a switch once you say I do. And it's like, who is this person that I thought I married? And they were wearing a mask the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you start to comment or speak up, it's a control and dominance thing rather than a
Oh, yes.
work through this with
Yes.
you.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I tried everything I could think of, to make the marriage work, but I didn't understand that it wasn't a real marriage.
No.
They promise to love, honor, and cherish, but they don't. All they want to do is control, manipulate, and gaslight. You're a possession. You're a toy. I actually used a line in my book. I felt like a psychological chew toy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your
And
supply.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, supply. It's a great way. And when I did call him on it, he became violent.
Yes.
So, you know, uh, in the States, 70% of the women who are murdered, yes, I'm using the word murdered, and it happens to 4 people every day in this country. 70% of them, the violence happens the day they try to leave.
Yes.
And one of the things I did, because I talked to an attorney and she woke me up, she convinced me to leave in secret.
Yes.
And
1,000.
yeah, and that was, I think, the thing that kept me safe. I got
Yes.
out alive because I left in secret,
Yes.
as she informed me, or it suggested, or twisted my arm, or hit me upside the head, metaphorically, of course. So
Yes. Yes. I had a friend that was so subtle, but it worked. I managed to get permission to go to an exercise class with a friend. And I really mean that, like, get permission.
right.
And she said to me, "Oh, are you happy?" And she said it like that. And I was like, "Of course I am." And then I was like, "Am I?
Mm,
Am I happy?" And it just sort of planted the seeds. And then from there, it became,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, a
it,
strategy.
and it's so difficult with the gaslighting and the manipulation, because they have you questioning your sanity, and you don't understand what's happening. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. It took a long time to figure that out.
Yes.
And everything he was doing was working against that. So
Yes.
I
Because
appreciate that.
narcissists don't self-reflect, but they know we do.
Right. All they want is their supply.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I do. And I was going to say something else there and I forgot what it was. Oh, I was going to say, for me, it was really also heartbreaking afterwards, after to be free, and how many people didn't believe me.
Yeah.
And I lost relationships, I lost
Mm-hmm.
friends. I was the villain in the
Mm-hmm.
story. And that was traumatic as well. It's like, why speak up if there's no
Right.
point, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. That happened to me to some extent, but I was so traumatized. I was really focused on myself and my
Yes.
healing.
Good.
I was so traumatized. I was driving through red lights and stop signs.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to get to work. I knew I had to break this pattern. And that's when I went to work with coaches and therapists.
Yeah.
And that was the turning point. I think, and this is a really important point, I think a lot of people get out of a situation like you or I have experienced, but then they don't go down the healing road and they get stuck. So they survive, but they don't learn how to heal and thrive. And that's something I've really written about. It's about, the last third of the book. It's
Yeah.
how I went about that process. But I was determined. I was not willing to repeat the pattern
Mm-hmm.
because I realized I was really lucky to have survived the first time. And I saw this pattern of bullying and stalking and going back years, and I needed to break that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I survived the first time. I may not get the opportunity to survive a second time.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
I was willing to do whatever it took and look at whatever piece of myself that I needed to look at. So there was no fear, there was just determination. Because I
Yes.
wanted to live. I wanted to, and I learned how to do that. And as I like to say, I learned how to fall in love with life again.
Yes. And yourself.
And yes,
Yes. So tell us a little bit about the personal empowerment. So you get to the point, you're free, you're at the point, the beginning of this healing journey. You mentioned you got coaches. Tell us a little bit about how you traverse this journey to personal empowerment and to the point of being able to write the book and do sort of what your dad did and use your experience now to help others navigate some
yeah,
of these.
yeah. I first went to work with a therapist, and I sought out trauma specialists
Yeah.
and work with them. And then I did that for a period of months, and then kind of felt like there had been some completion there, but that you never really get complete because we're emotional onions, right?
Yeah. There's always
Uh,
another layer. Yeah.
exactly. And then I went to work with an amazing life coach, and the whole dyslexic label, it was so interesting. We had this conversation. It was one of our first sessions together. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm never going to be successful. I'm dyslexic. I just can't be. I'm handicapped. And he just was silent for a minute. And then he said, Ellen, that is the biggest bunch of BS I have ever heard. And you have been gaslighted into believing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God. And that's when he and I began to deconstruct that idea. And that was a really unique process to go through because it was part of my identity. And I had
Yes.
to remove it from my identity. And I use the word deconstruct because that's really what it was. You have to
Yes.
deconstruct that idea. And then it literally changed my identity. And then I had to grieve that piece of it.
Yes.
And that's a big piece of moving forward and healing. And so you heal, and then that part of you moves, it is gone from you, and then you have to let go of it and grieve it to take the next step.
Yes.
So I just continued this process, and every day it got a little bit better. Every
Yeah.
day, just 1%. One of the people who I have done quite a bit of training with is retired Commander Mark Devine, who is a retired Navy SEAL, and he has a training program for civilians. And his saying is better and better every day, better and better every way, 1%.
Mm.
All you have to do is 1% and micro goals. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did. And I just reached out and continued the work and sought out places where I could learn and grow and heal. Now, one thing I do want to say, which I think is really, really important, if anybody out there is realizing that they need to go down a healing path and want to learn to thrive, please be very careful who you choose to work with.
Yes.
I only work with credentialed therapists, health, providers. Please check them out. Do not take them at face value. If they tell you that they have all the answers, run, don't walk. Seriously, because those are predators.
They are.
You're vulnerable to cults. You're vulnerable to really dangerous people. So
Toxic
please be
positivity.
very careful who you choose to work with. And
Yes.
yeah, check them out. check them
Yeah,
out.
I 100% agree. I like you want someone that you want as almost like a spiritual companion, right? Because like they're gonna know every dart. You have to really establish trust. I always say like when I write blogs or whatever, when I'm talking about my coaching, I'm always like, it is not as simple as you call me up and we're working together. Like
Mhm.
this is a relationship. And if
Yes.
you are with someone and it's a pressure to sign up and get started and you need to hustle towards it, that's not a good sign of a coach. That's a
No.
salesperson. That's a very different thing. But
Right.
I love that your therapist said that about BS. Like sometimes we just need someone to really shake us, and he did it so lovingly, right? Like he said it's
Yeah.
bullshit, but he didn't say you're bullshit. He said this concept is bullshit.
Right.
And pardon my language, but
No
um
worries.
yeah, but just being like, "Oh my God, I can give myself permission to think something different." And
Hmm.
it's funny we talk about, and sometimes you'll see this in toxic positivity, even with some of those predatory providers. They talk about, think better, just think new things, and it's really not that simple because yeah, we have limiting beliefs, but they come from limiting experiences, which means our body has physically reacted to something in our past, and it feels just as
Absolutely.
real as anything else. And what you
Hmm.
said about deconstructing, that's what it is. The process of deconstructing is engaging in disconfirming experiences that show us
Right.
that actually there is a different way. And
Hmm.
I love that you talked about grieving because I think that's the piece. Even so, I went through some healing stuff and pretty deep. And I went to a place that usually I feel very at home in, and it's like my sanctuary, it's my happy place. And it was sort of after some big steps in this healing process. And I just was like, what's wrong? I don't feel at home here.
Yeah,
And
because
I was
you've
really,
changed.
I was really sad because I was like, this
Yeah.
is this is where I feel most at home and it's safe. Like, why do I feel icky all of a
Right.
sudden?
Hmm.
And my therapist said it's because you're different and it'll just take a little time. You'll settle back in. You'll remember
Right.
that it is actually safe, but you'll have a new relationship with it because you're still shedding. So
Yes.
just know this is a good shedding. It's
Mhm.
not a bad discomfort. This is actually a good one,
Right.
but that's where people get stuck sometimes. Like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I thought healing would feel good. It
Right.
will eventually, but there's a
Exactly.
process, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. One of the things that my coach said to me too was that, these ideas were imposed on you.
Mm.
It was inflicted on you. So, that's really important. It's not our fault. We so, but you know what, I really appreciate what you said about, you go back to an environment where where you used to be comfortable, but what it is that you're different.
Mhm.
And the other thing I think that people should understand is that it takes time. My book is really about a 10-year healing journey. And that's what it takes.
Takes about
It
a
it
decade.
takes time. So a short story that happened in this process, and this was after the manuscript was finished.
Mhm.
Um, but I'll back up again. So I escaped from my ex and I drove from Florida to New Hampshire. My parents took me in.
Yeah.
And as I was driving, 95 all the way up the East Coast, I was driving through Washington, D.C., and there's a point on Interstate 95 where you look to the west and you can see the Washington Monument.
Mm.
And, that was 2023. I mean, I'm sorry, 2013.
Okay.
And then one of the coaches, another coach who I worked with, his name is Dennis Stoika, and he's just a recently retired FBI agent, supervisory FBI agent, he would remind me. And he does training for coaching and training, but he also trains in reality-based self-defense
Mhm.
and Krav Maga. And because I had experienced this violence with my ex-husband, one of the things I took on was learning how to defend myself.
Yeah.
So I actually, in 2023, 10 years later, I flew out because he's on the East Coast and, the DC area. And I flew out and spent 2 days of training with him. He put me through 22 hours of training in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
It was intense and it was physically demanding, but it was what I knew what I was signing up for. So here I am on my way. I'm 95 and I look over 10 years later, almost exactly 10 years later. I look to my west and I can see the Washington Monument again. So that was a big moment. That's not in the book.
No, but yes, we're like, here I am.
Yeah.
Here I stand. Didn't know I
Yeah.
would be standing at this point, and here I am.
Yeah.
Not only standing, but like standing
Empowered.
out and healthy. Yes,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What
Thanks.
what would you want anyone out there with low self-worth to know most?
I think the important thing to understand is that you may not realize that you're carrying low self-confidence and low self-esteem. Um, you know, one of the principles that Mark Divine teaches about is called the witness.
Mhm.
You want to kind of take a look at yourself and your behavior and your thinking. Another word is metacognition. How are you reacting to your environment? How are you reacting to your friends? Are you always belittling yourself? Are you making yourself small? And work with a therapist, licensed, credentialed, good therapist. And the good news is you can take back your self-esteem and self-worth and self-confidence, but it's going to take some work. And find the things that work for you, especially the healing is really important for that as well. Um, different things work for me at different times. One of the things I'm exploring right now is Reiki. And I'm
Yes.
having some really great success with that. Again, a very carefully chosen practitioner.
Mhm.
And you may not find the right therapist at first, but don't give up. Keep going. And there are other things that are very healthy for our energy system. Meditation and breath work is mission critical. And then also, you can try things like acupuncture. Again, just because it doesn't work at first, or you may not see a result right away, it may just not be the right time. Just continue down the path of working and moving forward 1% better every day. That's all you have to do is just 1%.
I love that. Thank you. Where can people find you, Ellen, and order your book?
Sure. So I'm on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. And then I have a website, which is ellenbusch.com. And you can email me through there. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. But the spelling of my name is Busch. So the family joke is it's Bush like the beer, not like the president.
Yeah.
And I have to thank Anheuser-Busch for their
Yes.
marketing campaign because everybody gets that.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing just so honestly and openly. It's been absolutely lovely to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I can turn my story into a form of service and helping other people. That's why I've written the book. And that's why I coached.
Yes. Yes. You're doing great.